The polished mahogany table gleamed under the fluorescent lights, reflecting the grim faces gathered around it. We were there for Grandpa Joe's will reading, a somber occasion made heavier by the sheer weight of expectation, and for me, a quiet, simmering anxiety I couldn't quite place. My name is Aurora, and for 30 years I lived under the assumption that I was as much a part of the Miller family as the air we breathed. Joe and Martha Miller were my grandparents. Their son, David, my father, their house, my childhood home, or so I thought. The lawyer, a Mr. Sterling, a man with a perpetually furrowed brow and eyes that seemed to judge your life choices based on your tie knot, cleared his throat. He began reading, the legalese washing over us until he reached the distribution of assets. Names were called: David, my supposed father; Sarah, his sister; even distant cousins I barely knew were mentioned. My name wasn't. A knot tightened in my stomach. It had to be a mistake. Maybe I was listed under a different designation. A ward, a special bequest. My eyes darted to David. He wouldn't meet my gaze. Sarah looked anywhere but at me. Martha, my grandmother, sat stoically, her face a mask I couldn't read. Then Mr. Sterling paused. He looked directly at me, a look that wasn't unkind, but held a profound, unsettling pity. He reached under the table and pulled out a large, leather-bound photo album. Not a legal document, not a deed, but a photo album. He slid it across the table towards me. His voice, usually dry and formal, softened slightly, though the words themselves hit like a physical blow. He said, "Aurora, Joseph left this for you. He wanted you to have it. But he also instructed me to be clear, legally and factually. You were not adopted. You were not his biological grandchild. You were not, by law, part of this family." The room tilted. The light seemed to dim. Not part of this family? The Millers? The people who raised me, who tucked me in at night, who taught me to ride a bike, who celebrated my birthdays, who were just Grandpa and Grandma and Dad? It didn't make sense. It was a cruel joke. But Mr. Sterling wasn't joking. His face was earnest, regretful even. The album felt heavy in my hands, heavier than lead. It was filled with pictures. Pictures of me as a baby, being held by Martha. Me as a toddler, sitting on Joe's lap. Me at school plays, at family picnics, at graduations. My entire life, documented within the pages of this album, presented to me as proof that I existed in their lives, while simultaneously being told I didn't belong to them. How could 30 years of memories, of love, of shared history be erased by a few sentences from a lawyer? It felt impossible. It was impossible. Yet, there it was. The truth, or their version of it, laid bare on a sterile conference table. To understand the depth of that shock, you have to understand what the Miller family meant to me. It wasn't just a name. It was my identity. My mother, I was told, had died shortly after I was born. My father, David, had been a young, struggling artist, unable to care for a baby on his own. So, he'd brought me home to his parents, Joe and Martha, and they'd raised me. They were my anchors. Grandpa Joe, with his booming laugh and endless supply of terrible jokes, taught me how to fish and how to change a tire. Grandma Martha, quiet and steady, taught me how to bake and how to find peace in the garden. David, my dad, was often absent, pursuing his art, but when he was home, he was warm and loving, if a little distant. Sarah, his sister, my aunt, was like a second mother, always there to listen or offer advice. This wasn't just a family I lived with. They were my family. My world revolved around them. I remember asking about my mother when I was younger. They'd show me a single, faded photograph of a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Her name was Eleanor. They'd tell me she was wonderful, talented, and that she loved me very much. They'd say she got sick very suddenly and couldn't fight it. It was a sad story, but a simple one that fit neatly into the narrative of my life. A beloved mother lost too soon, a father who did his best, and grandparents who stepped in with open hearts. It explained why I didn't have a mother, but it never made me feel less than whole, because I had so much love surrounding me. Or so I believed. The lawyer's words didn't just reveal a legal status. They shattered the very foundation of my reality. Every memory, every shared glance, every word of affection. Did it all mean something different now? Did they know? All of them? Did Grandpa Joe know when he was teaching me to tie my shoes? Did Grandma Martha know when she was holding my hand? Did David know when he introduced me as his daughter? Did Sarah know when she helped me pick out a prom dress? The questions swirled, a dizzying, sickening vortex in my mind. Looking back on moments, small things I'd dismissed at the time now seemed potentially significant. A hushed conversation that stopped when I entered the room. A strange look exchanged between Martha and David. A question about my mother that was quickly shut down. Were these clues I had been too naive or too trusting to see? It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many things do we miss in plain sight because we simply can't imagine the truth being so far from what we believe? What would you look for if you started doubting everything you knew about your family? Let me know below. I sat there, numb, the weight of the photo album anchoring me to the chair while my mind reeled. The lawyer continued talking, explaining that the album was a personal gift, separate from the estate, a memento of the years I had spent with Joseph. He reiterated that there were no provisions for me in the will because, legally, I had no standing as a family member. He then moved on to other matters, the distribution of property, the execution of debts, his voice a distant buzz. The other family members shifted uncomfortably. David still wouldn't look at me. Sarah dabbed at her eyes, though whether it was for Joe or for the situation unfolding, I couldn't tell. Martha remained impassive, her gaze fixed on a point beyond the lawyer's head. It was excruciating. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to shake them all until they told me this was a terrible mistake, but I couldn't. I was frozen, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. The world I had known had just imploded, and I was left sifting through the rubble, clinging to a photo album that was now both a precious record of my past and a brutal reminder of a lie. How long had they known? How long had they kept this secret? And why? Why raise me as their own, give me their name, their love, only to reveal at the end that none of it was real? The question screamed inside my head, unheard by anyone else in that room. All I could do was clutch the album and try to breathe through the suffocating weight of betrayal and confusion. My life, as I understood it, was over. The woman who walked into that office expecting to mourn her grandfather and perhaps receive a small inheritance was gone. In her place was someone else entirely, someone adrift, without a family, without a past she could trust. And it all started with a lawyer, a will, and a photo album. And it all started with a lawyer, a will, and a photo album. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen, the weight of the album in my hands feeling heavier than stone. The lawyer cleared his throat, a small, polite sound that ripped me back to the sterile reality of the room. My family was staring at me. Aunt Carol looked like she'd seen a ghost, her face pale and drawn. Uncle David had his hand on her arm, his expression a mix of pity and something else I couldn't quite read. Maybe guilt, maybe just discomfort. My cousins, who I'd grown up with, cousins I'd shared holidays and scraped knees and secrets with, looked away, unable to meet my eyes. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally, the lawyer spoke again, his voice softer this time, almost apologetic. He explained the formalities were concluded. He handed the will document to Uncle David as the executor. It was clear I was dismissed. There was nothing left for me here. I stood up slowly, my legs shaky, my hands still clutching the album. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. What was there to say? Thanks for the 86 years of lies? Glad we cleared that up. No. The words were stuck somewhere deep in my throat, a bitter lump that wouldn't move. I remember walking out of that office building like I was underwater. The city sounds, the traffic, the people rushing past, it all felt distant, muffled. I got to my car, somehow managing to unlock it and get inside. I just sat there in the driver's seat, the engine off, the keys dangling uselessly in the ignition. The album lay on the passenger seat, a silent accuser. I couldn't bring myself to touch it again, not yet. My mind was a whirlwind of fragmented thoughts and memories. Every family dinner, every birthday party, every vacation, every "I love you." Were they all lies? Was their affection fake? Did they look at me and see an intruder? The betrayal cut the deepest. Not just from my grandfather, who had orchestrated this final cruel reveal, but from everyone else. My parents, who were gone now, but who had raised me. My aunt and uncle, who had always been so kind, so much a part of my life. My cousins. Had they known? Had they been in on it? The thought made me feel physically sick. How could they? How could you look someone in the eye every day, share your lives, and keep such a monumental secret? I sat in that car for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. I couldn't go home. Home was their house, the house where I grew up, the house filled with pictures of me alongside them, pictures that now felt like elaborate props in a decades-long play. I needed to be somewhere else, somewhere quiet, somewhere I could try to make sense of this. I started the car and drove, not really sure where I was going, just driving. I ended up at a small park by the river, a place I used to come to clear my head when I was younger. I parked the car and just sat there for a long time, watching the water flow. It was late afternoon, the sun starting to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows. I finally reached over and picked up the album again. It was a standard photo album, the kind with sticky pages and plastic overlays. It felt old, well used. My hands trembled as I opened the cover. The first page. It wasn't what I expected. Not a baby picture, not a family portrait. It was a single photograph, placed carefully on the page. A woman. She was young, maybe in her early 20s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She was holding a baby, wrapped in a blanket. The baby's face was obscured, just a little bundle. There was a date written neatly below the photo in faded ink, October 12th, 1988. That was my birth month and year. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was this her? My mother? I turned the page. More photos. The same woman, sometimes alone, sometimes with the baby, sometimes with another woman who looked older, maybe her mother or an aunt. There were pictures of them in different settings. A small, cozy-looking apartment, a park, standing outside a modest house. There were no photos of the family I knew, the family whose name I carried. None. This was a completely different world, a different life. As I flipped through the pages, a narrative started to emerge, told through snapshots. The young woman and the baby growing slightly older, starting to crawl, then stand. There were pictures of the baby's first birthday, complete with a smudged cake and a single candle. The young woman was always there, her smile sometimes radiant, sometimes a little tired, but always full of love for the child. There were other people too. A man who appeared occasionally, his face kind but a little distant. Was he the father? There were other women, other children. It felt like a community, a different family entirely. And then, abruptly, the photos changed. The setting was different. The faces were different. The young woman was still there in some of the earlier pictures in this new section, but less frequently. The baby, now a toddler, was suddenly in pictures with the family I knew, with my parents, with my aunt and uncle. There was a photo of me, maybe 2 years old, sitting on my mother's lap, both of us smiling. And in the background of that same photo, almost hidden, was the young woman from the first part of the album, standing apart, watching. Her expression was unreadable. My breath hitched. It was like a line had been drawn in the album, a clear division between two lives. My life before and my life after. After what? After I was given away? After I was taken? The album didn't say, it just showed. It showed a life where I was with this other woman, this woman who was clearly my mother. and then it showed a life where I was with the family who raised me. The later pages were filled with photos I recognized. Photos from my childhood, my school years, holidays, birthdays, graduations. Photos that were also in the albums at the house. But seeing them here, in this album, after seeing the first part, changed everything. They weren't just happy memories anymore. They were evidence. Evidence of a stolen life, or a rescued life, or something in between. I continued turning the pages, looking for clues, for answers. There were no notes, no captions other than the occasional date. Just pictures. Pictures of a life I didn't know I had, and pictures of the life I thought was mine. My head was spinning. Who was that woman? Why did she give me up? Or why was I taken from her? What was the connection? How did my grandfather fit into this? Was he her father? Did he arrange this? The album offered no explanations, only more questions, each one more painful than the last. It was a visual record of a secret so big it had shaped my entire existence. I closed the album, the cover feeling like a heavy door slamming shut on the past. I needed to know more. I needed to find out who that woman was. I needed to understand why. The shock was slowly giving way to a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't going to let this stand. I wasn't going to let my entire life be defined by a secret I didn't even know existed until today. I was going to find the truth. And the first step was this album. It was the key, the only link I had to the life before. I had to figure out who was in these pictures, starting with the woman who held me as a baby. Okay. I closed the album, my hands still trembling a little. The pictures were burned into my mind, especially the one of that woman holding me. Who was she? I needed to know. My first thought was my grandmother, but she passed away years ago. And anyway, these photos didn't look like her house, didn't look like the life I knew. My grandfather was still around, but our relationship was complicated, and honestly, after finding this, I wasn't sure I could even look him in the eye right now. He had to know about this, right? How could he not? I sat there for a long time, just staring at the album on the table. My apartment felt different now, like a stage set for a play I didn't know I was in. Every object, every picture on the wall felt like it belonged to someone else. This secret, it wasn't just a piece of information. It was a fundamental shift in my reality. It rearranged everything I thought I knew about myself, about my family. I picked up the album again, carefully turning the pages. I looked for anything that could give me a clue. Dates, names, locations written on the back. Most pages were blank on the reverse, just the photos glued down. But then, near the back, tucked into a little sleeve, I found a loose photo. It was smaller than the others, maybe a snapshot. And on the back, written in faded ink, was a name and a date. Eleanor Vance, July 1984. Eleanor Vance, that was it. A name. It didn't mean anything to me. I didn't recognize it, didn't know anyone by that name. But it was a lead. The date, July 1984, was just a few months before my own birth in October of that year. Could Eleanor Vance be the woman in the pictures? Could she be my mother? My heart started pounding again, a different kind of pounding this time. Not just shock, but a nervous energy, a sense of possibility. How do you find someone with just a name and a date from 40 years ago? In the age before the internet was everywhere, before social media connected everyone, how did people find each other? I started with the basics. I went to my computer and typed Eleanor Vance, July 1984 into a search engine. Not surprisingly, that was too vague. Thousands of results, none that seemed relevant. I tried adding my city, then the city where I was born. Still nothing definitive. It was like searching for a single grain of sand on a beach. I spent hours online, going down rabbit holes, looking at old online directories, trying variations of the name, adding potential keywords like adoption or baby. It was exhausting and demoralizing. Every dead end felt like another door slamming in my face. The photos themselves were my only other resource. I went back to the album looking for any background details. Was there a sign in the distance? A unique building? A car? Anything that could pinpoint a location? I saw trees that looked like they were from somewhere rural or suburban, houses that seemed older, maybe from the 50s or 60s. One photo had a mailbox with a partial number on it, but not enough to be useful. Another showed a glimpse of what might be a street sign, but it was too blurry. It was frustrating. These were glimpses of a life, but they were frustratingly anonymous. They told a story, but they didn't give me the key to unlock it. Then I remembered something. My grandfather. He kept everything. Old papers, documents, journals even. Could there be something in his things? Something that related to Eleanor Vance? Or to that time? The thought of going through his personal belongings felt invasive, even considering what I'd found. But he was the only link. He was the one who gave me the album. He had to be involved. The idea of confronting him was terrifying. What would he say? Would he lie? Would he be angry? Would he explain everything? I didn't know if I was ready for any of those possibilities. But I also knew I couldn't just sit here and do nothing. The not knowing was a physical ache. I wrestled with it for a couple of days. I barely slept, just replaying images from the album in my head, trying to connect dots that weren't there. I thought about calling a private investigator, but that felt like a huge step and expensive. I thought about trying to find adoption records, but I knew that was a complex and often sealed process. The most direct path, the one that scared me the most, was my grandfather. He lived about an hour away. I could just show up, or I could call. Calling felt slightly less confrontational, but also easier for him to brush off. Showing up would force a conversation. I went back and forth, my mind a battlefield of fear and determination. Part of me wanted to just put the album away, pretend I never found it, and go back to the life I thought I had. But I knew I couldn't. That life was a lie, or at least built on a foundation of secrets. I had to know the truth, no matter how painful. After another sleepless night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to call. I was going to drive there. I needed to see his face when I asked him about this. I needed to see his reaction. It felt like the only way to get a real answer, or at least to gauge his honesty. Packing a small bag felt surreal. It was just a day trip, but it felt like I was embarking on a journey to a different country, a different time. I put the album carefully in the bag. I knew I'd need it. Getting in the car, my hands were clammy on the steering wheel. The drive felt longer than usual. Every mile felt like a step closer to potentially shattering my world even more. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would ask him. "Grandpa, I found this album." No, too abrupt. "Grandpa, can we talk about something important?" Better, but still vague. As I pulled onto his street, my heart was a drum against my ribs. His house looked the same, the familiar porch, the old oak tree in the yard. It looked like the picture of stability and normalcy, the kind of place where secrets didn't exist. But I knew better now. I parked the car and just sat there for a moment, taking deep breaths, trying to steady myself. This was it. The moment of truth, or at least the next step towards it. I was about to open a door I might not be able to close again. Going to your family, the people you trust, with something this huge and potentially damaging felt incredibly risky. What if it destroyed everything? What if he denied it? What if he got angry? What if the truth was worse than I could imagine? It was a gamble, a leap into the unknown, but it felt like the only way forward. What would you have done? Let me know below. I got out of the car, the album heavy in my bag, and walked towards the front door. There was no turning back now. I walked up the familiar steps, the wood groaning slightly under my weight, just like it always had. The screen door was latched, and I fumbled with it for a second before pushing the doorbell. I could hear it chime inside, a sound I'd heard 1,000,000 times. Footsteps approached, slow and steady. The door opened, and there he was, my grandfather, looking a little surprised to see me standing there. "Hey, sweetie," he said, his voice warm. Didn't expect you. Everything okay? I tried to smile, but I think it came out more like a grimace. Hey, Grandpa, can I come in? I need to talk to you about something important. He must have seen the look on my face. His brow furrowed slightly, and he opened the door wider. Of course, come in, come in. I stepped inside, the air smelling of old wood and something baking. He led me to the living room, the same room where I'd spent countless hours playing board games, listening to his stories, feeling completely safe and loved. It felt different now, charged with an unspoken tension. We sat down, him in his usual armchair, me on the sofa. He waited, looking at me with concern. The silence stretched, and my heart started its frantic beat again. I reached into my bag and pulled out the photo album. I laid it on the coffee table between us. Grandpa, I started, my voice a little shaky. I went to the will reading for Grandma Eleanor. His expression didn't change much, but I saw a flicker in his eyes. Oh, yes, I wasn't able to make it. How was it? Everything straightforward? Not exactly, I said, pushing the album towards him. The lawyer, she gave me this, and she said something. He picked up the album, his movements slow. He looked at the cover, then opened it carefully. He didn't need to look inside, not really. I could tell he knew exactly what it was. His face seemed to age 10 years in an instant. The warmth drained away, replaced by a deep sadness, a weariness I'd never seen before. She said I wasn't part of this family, I continued, the words tumbling out now. That these pictures, this is the real family. Not us, not Mom. He closed the album gently, his gaze fixed on it. He didn't look at me. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. I waited, my breath held tight in my chest. I needed him to say something, anything, to make sense of it. Finally he sighed, a long, ragged sound. He looked up at me then, his eyes filled with a pain I couldn't fathom. Oh, honey, I was hoping this would never come out like this. What is it, Grandpa? I whispered. What does she mean? What is this album? He ran a hand over the cover of the album. This was Eleanor's family, her first family. My mind reeled. First family? Grandma Eleanor? But she'd been married to him for 50 years. I'd only ever known her as my grandmother, his wife. She was married before, he said, his voice low. A long, long time ago, before I met her. She had a daughter with her first husband. A daughter. My mom? Was that what he was saying? That daughter. That was your mother, honey, he confirmed, as if reading my mind. Your mother was Eleanor's daughter from her first marriage. Her name was, well, her name wasn't what you knew it as back then. This album, these are pictures of your mother's biological father and his family, Eleanor's first husband and his parents, his siblings. I stared at him, my mouth slightly open. My mom's biological father? But I knew my grandfather. I knew my father. This was too much, too fast. But you? I stammered. You're my grandpa. You raised my mom. He nodded slowly. Yes, honey. I am your grandpa. I raised your mother from the time she was just a little girl. Her father, Eleanor's first husband, he died very suddenly, not long after your mother was born. Eleanor was devastated. She was young, a widow with a baby. His family, they were grieving too, of course, but there were complications, differences. Eleanor felt very alone. That's when I met her. He paused, gathering his thoughts. We fell in love. I loved your mother, like she was my own from the moment I met her. We got married, and I adopted your mother. Legally. She took my name. We were a family. We were your family. He gestured between us, then towards the house around us. This is your family, honey. Always has been. Eleanor and I, your mom, you, all of us. But the lawyer said, I trailed off, trying to process this new history. My mom was adopted by my grandpa and her biological father's family, the one in the album. They were supposedly the real family? Eleanor's first husband's family. They never really accepted me, my grandpa said, his voice tinged with old hurt. They blamed Eleanor, in a way, for taking their grandchild away, even though she was the one left alone. When I adopted your mother, it created a final break. They were hurt, angry. They saw it as us deliberately cutting ties. And I suppose, in a way, we did. Eleanor wanted a fresh start to protect your mother from the pain and the conflict. So, she made a choice. He looked down at the album again. She kept this. These pictures. I think maybe she felt guilty. Or maybe she just couldn't bring herself to completely erase that part of your mother's history, even though she chose to leave it behind. She never spoke of it. Not to your mother, not to anyone. It was a secret she carried. A secret. A secret that had been kept for decades, from my mom, from me. Why didn't Mom know? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Why didn't I know? Eleanor was afraid, he said simply. Afraid it would hurt your mother, afraid it would confuse things. She built a new life with me, with us. She wanted that to be your mother's whole world, her whole identity. And I agreed. We both thought it was for the best, to protect her, to give her stability. He sighed again, a heavier sound this time. When your mother passed, Eleanor was devastated all over again. I think it brought up all that old grief, all that old guilt about the secret. When she made her will, she must have decided that this part of the history needed to be acknowledged somehow. I didn't know about the album or what she'd instructed the lawyer to say. She handled the will details herself, mostly. So, Grandma Eleanor, the woman I knew as my sweet, quiet grandmother, had carried this immense secret her entire life. She had a whole other family, a whole other life before the one she built with my grandpa. And my mom. My mom had a biological father and a whole lineage she never knew about. The lawyer. When she said I wasn't part of this family, I started, the pieces clicking into place, painful as they were. She meant Eleanor's first family, my grandpa finished for me. The family in the album. From her perspective, you weren't biologically descended from them. Your connection was through Eleanor, who had chosen to leave that family behind. It was a cruel way to put it, heartless even, but technically, that's what she meant. You aren't biologically related to the people in that album. My head was spinning. It was like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. Everything I thought I knew about my family history was suddenly different. Incomplete. A carefully constructed story with a massive omission. My mom was adopted by the man I thought was her biological father. My grandmother had a hidden past and a deceased first husband whose family considered themselves the real family. So, who was he? I asked, looking at the album again, at the faded faces of strangers who were somehow connected to my mother. My mom's, her biological father? My grandpa picked up the album and opened it to a page with a young man's picture. This was Thomas Miller. Your mother's name was originally, well, let's just say it was different. She became a Smith when I adopted her. Thomas was a good man from what Eleanor told me. They were very much in love. It was a tragedy when he died. He turned a page. These are his parents, the Millers, and his sister. He pointed to a few faces. They lived upstate. Eleanor visited a few times after Thomas died, with your mother, but things were strained. After the adoption, the visits stopped. They never spoke again. So, somewhere upstate, there was a whole other branch of my mother's family tree. People I had never met, never known existed. People who might not even know I existed. People who, according to the lawyer's harsh words, considered themselves the real family. It wasn't that I doubted my grandpa. His explanation felt true, heavy with the weight of years of silence and sacrifice. It explained the album, the lawyer's words, the secrecy. But understanding it didn't make the shock any less profound. My identity felt fractured, like a puzzle piece had been removed, leaving a gaping hole. The family portrait I'd always held in my mind was suddenly incomplete, revealing a hidden layer beneath the surface. My mom, the person I thought I knew everything about, had this fundamental part of her history that was kept from her. And from me. I looked at my grandpa, sitting there with the album in his hands, the keeper of this long-held secret. He looked tired, burdened. I knew he had done what he thought was best, that he loved my mom and me fiercely. But the weight of the secret, the decades of silence, felt immense in the room with us. The silence stretched again, filled with the unspoken history that had just been laid bare. I didn't know what to say, what to ask next. My mind was racing, trying to absorb it all, to figure out what this meant for me, for my understanding of who I was and where I came from. The familiar living room suddenly felt unfamiliar, tinged with the ghosts of a past I never knew existed. The silence stretched again, filled with the unspoken history that had just been laid bare. I didn't know what to say, what to ask next. My mind was racing, trying to absorb it all, to figure out what this meant for me, for my understanding of who I was and where I came from. The familiar living room suddenly felt unfamiliar, tinged with the ghosts of a past I never knew existed. Finally, I found my voice, a little shaky. I asked my grandpa why. Why the secret? Why all these years? He looked at me, his eyes tired but steady. He said it was a different time. Adoption wasn't talked about openly like it is now. There was still a stigma, a sense of shame for some. He and Grandma had wanted to protect my mom, to give her a life free from any potential judgment or complication. They loved her fiercely, he repeated, and they believed that keeping this private was the best way to ensure her happiness and stability. They created a narrative, a story of her birth, and they lived it completely. It became their truth. They never anticipated the possibility of things like DNA tests becoming so common, so accessible. They thought their secret was safe, buried deep in the past. He said it was the hardest thing they ever did, keeping that part of her history from her. Every birthday, every family gathering, every story they told, they were consciously omitting this fundamental piece. The weight of that must have been crushing. He looked genuinely regretful, not for adopting her, but for the secret itself and the pain it was now causing. I listened, trying to reconcile the loving, honest grandparents I knew with this monumental deception. It was hard. It felt like a betrayal, even though I knew it came from a place of love. A misguided, old-fashioned kind of love, maybe, but love nonetheless. My grandpa looked at me, pleadingly almost. He said he knew it was a lot to take in, and he was sorry that I had to learn about it this way, through a kid I sent off on a whim. He had planned to tell my mom eventually, he claimed, when the time felt right, whatever that meant. But the time never felt right. And now the decision was out of his hands. The truth was out there, undeniable. The biggest hurdle, of course, was telling my mom. That was the conversation I dreaded the most. How do you tell the person you love most in the world that their entire life story, the one they've always believed, isn't completely true? That a fundamental piece of their identity has been kept from them for over 50 years. My grandpa wanted to be there, but I knew this was something I needed to do, just me and her. It felt like my responsibility somehow, since my curiosity had unearthed it. I went over to her house the next day, my stomach in knots. We sat in her living room, the same kind of comfortable, familiar space as my grandpa's, but filled with her things, her memories, built on a foundation that was now shifting beneath our feet. I started slowly, talking about the DNA results in general, the percentages, the regions. Then I took a deep breath and told her about the close match, the one I couldn't place. I told her I'd talked to Grandpa and that he had explained it. And then I just said it, the words feeling heavy on my tongue. "Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "Grandpa told me that you were adopted." The look on her face is something I'll never forget. Confusion first, then disbelief, and then a profound sadness, mixed with shock. She sat there, stunned, processing the words. Adopted? She repeated, the word foreign in her own mouth. She looked at me, then away, her eyes distant. She talked about her childhood, remembering specific moments, specific stories her parents had told her about her birth, about her first few weeks. It all seemed so real, so concrete. How could it not be true? It was her life. We talked for hours that day. I shared what little information I had, the name of the close match, the fact that they were a first cousin. She asked questions, hesitant at first, then more urgent. Who were her birth parents? Did she have siblings? Why was she given up? The questions poured out, decades of unspoken history demanding answers. I didn't have many answers, just the confirmation of the secret. The initial shock was followed by a complex mix of emotions. There was hurt, deep hurt, that her parents, the only parents she'd ever known, the ones she loved and who loved her so fiercely, had kept this from her. She felt a sense of loss for the history she didn't know, the biological family she'd never met. But there was also confusion. She wasn't angry at me, thankfully. She understood I hadn't meant to uncover a secret, just learn about my ancestry. Her focus was on her parents, her grandparents. She struggled to understand their reasoning, even as I explained what Grandpa had told me. It was hard for her to reconcile their immense love with this significant omission. Over the next few weeks, things were delicate. My mom talked to my grandpa, long, emotional conversations that were private between them. There were tears, explanations, apologies, and eventually, understanding. It wasn't easy, but their bond, built on a lifetime of love, was strong enough to weather this storm. My grandpa's relief at finally having the truth out was palpable, even amidst the pain it caused. My mom decided she wanted to know more. She reached out to the DNA match, the first cousin. That led to contact with her biological mother's side of the family. It was a slow, cautious process, filled with trepidation and hope. She learned about her birth mother, who had passed away some years ago. She learned she had half-siblings. It was overwhelming, like opening a whole new chapter of her life she never knew existed. It wasn't a simple fairy tale reunion, of course. There were complexities, different life paths, different expectations. It was just family. More family than she thought she had. For me, this journey changed everything and nothing. My mom is still my mom. My grandpa is still my grandpa. Our love for each other didn't change. But my understanding of our family history, of my own genetic makeup, expanded exponentially. It added layers I never knew were there. It made me think about identity, about what makes a family. Is it blood? Or is it love, shared history, the people who raise you and are there for you through thick and thin? For me, it's the latter. But the biological piece is still a part of the story, a part that was missing. Discovering this secret was painful, messy, and completely unexpected. It forced us to confront difficult truths and have hard conversations. But it also opened up possibilities, new connections, and a deeper understanding of the people we love. It made me appreciate the complexities of life and the fact that everyone has a story, sometimes more than one, and not all of them are easy. It also made me realize how much courage it takes to live with a secret, and how much courage it takes to face the truth when it finally comes out. This kind of revelation changes your perspective on your own history and future. What would you do if you uncovered a major family secret like this? Let me know in the comments below. We are still navigating the new family connections, integrating this expanded sense of self into our lives. It's a process, and it will take time, but we are doing it together, as a family. My mom is finding peace with her history, embracing the new pieces of her story while cherishing the life she's always known. My grandpa is healing, relieved of his burden of secrecy, and I am left with a profound sense of gratitude for the journey, for the truth, and for the incredible, complex, ever-evolving family I belong to. It wasn't the ancestry research I expected, but it was the one I needed. It taught me that family isn't always about where you came from, but who you are, and who you choose to be with through all the hidden layers and unexpected turns. And that, I think, is a beautiful thing.